Okay, we're off. There you go.
Okay, cool. Hello, my name's Kat Link and I'm a SEND advisor from Surrey County Council. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about early identification within early years. So why is early identification important? Early response to a concern and early identification and intervention are key to helping children reach their full potential. Early identification is key to getting in support strategies and getting therapies in place. The research shows us that the earlier an intervention can go in place, the bigger impact it can have on a child's development. Early identification enables us to help a child reach their full potential. So how does early identification happen? It happens for a number of ways. Most importantly, through parents and carers. As Pippa has already said, you guys spend the most time with your children, so you have the first insight into how they are developing. Wider family or friends may be the first to notice that something is developing slightly differently within your child. A few years ago, I worked with a family and it was grandma that picked up that the child wasn't reacting to people talking in the room, because when mum was playing with her 6-month-old, she was always right in front of him. So he was reacting to her facial expressions. Whereas grandma had the opportunity to sit back a bit and could see that when mum was playing with her other children, he wasn't reacting to the noises. So off he went for a hearing test. Identification can also happen through that health visitor check that Pippa was talking to you about earlier. So it's really important that you work with your health visitor and fill in those simple forms. Identification can also happen through the early years provider. So that could be a day nursery, a preschool, a childminder, sort of anybody else that might be looking after your child throughout the day. When could we identify something? This could be through scans or a test pre-birth. It could be at birth, or it could be in the years that follow. So who is responsible for early identification? Early identification isn't the responsibility of one person at all. It's everybody who is involved in a child's life. Early identification happens at its best when everyone involved with the child keeps an open line of communication. And this means professionals involved in your child's life need to work in partnership with you as the parent or carer. The role of the early years provider in early identification. So within the early years foundation stage, which is the national curriculum for the under 5s, early years providers are required to carry out ongoing assessments. These don't need to be recorded, but observations should be shared with parents and carers. Early years practitioners should have a good knowledge of their key children. And this starts with the information gathered before a child has started within the early years provision. So this information can be gathered when a key worker or nursery manager is doing a show round with you as parents. It could be when they're having conversations with you before your child has started. It might be talking to the child. And before the child starts, and in those first few weeks, the nursery will put together a one-page profile or an all about me. We would also expect that if the child has attended another nursery or had been with a childminder before they come to nursery, that the new nursery would be talking to that previous setting to get any other insights into the child's development. Within the all about me or the one-page profile, the setting or the key worker will be collecting information that would help that child settle, to find out what's important for that child. And this should be done with all children. It will also indicate fairly early on if there's any areas of development that should be paid closer attention to. If the child has started with a provider after the 2-year progress check with the health visiting service, we would encourage the provider to be asking to see a copy of that progress check. The child's key worker would also carry out observations throughout the child's time with the nursery. On the slide, I've listed a few types of focuses of the observations that a nursery might carry out, but there's lots of other types as well. So the ad hoc observations really are the bread and butter of early years. These are usually in the moment when you see a child doing something you haven't seen them do before, or you notice something that you hadn't previously. But there are some more specific observations a key worker might carry out, such as a tracking observation. This could be useful if the key worker is noticing that a child comes straight into the session and goes for the cars, for example, every time. The key worker might see how long they've stayed there, and did they move on to another activity by themselves, or did they need an adult to help move them on or extend their play? With a timed observation, the key worker might have noticed that a child moves between activities a lot. So they've decided to do an observation for a set 15-minute period and see how long they've stayed at each activity they have attended in those 15 minutes. But also, what are they doing when they are at that activity? Do they go to it, pick something up, put it back down and move it on? Or do they stay and explore for a longer period of time? And then an adult focused activity could be used if the key person hasn't seen a child go near specific provisions such as Play-Doh. The adult could run a Play-Doh based activity and entice the child into the play. Here, the key worker could see what the child then did with the Play-Doh. Are they using any language? Did they want to touch it? Or had they just not noticed the Play-Doh area in the nursery before? So what next? After you've raised concerns or mentioned things that you might be worried about, and the key worker has carried out observations, we would then expect the key worker to speak with their SENCO, or who is the Special Educational Needs Coordinator, or their nursery manager, and they might involve our service. We would be looking for some tracking to be taking place. This way, we can see where the child is currently in their development, and then we can review this tracker so that as strategies go into place, we can see if any progress is being made. So this typically would be done on a developmental tracker, and this is a universal tool that could be used for all children. It broadly looks at ages and stages of development, again, in the areas of learning in the early years foundation stage. If from parental concerns, provider concerns or observations and the developmental tracker, it can be seen that communication and language are the main area of concern, the setting could use the early language monitoring tool. This was developed to look at ages and stages of speech, language and communication. If the delay being seen on the developmental tracker is across a few areas of development, then we have a teaching and talking assessment, which might be more beneficial. This drills down into specific areas of a child's development. The early years provider has a few tools at their disposal, and we would be asking them to look into their provision and their environment. Is there anything that needs to change that would support this child's needs? We would be asking them to utilise the speech and language therapy pack that is available on the local offer website. There is also an occupational therapy pack on the local offer website that could be useful to support with sensory needs, or it could be useful for self-help skills. There is also a pack for supporting positive behaviour, and this can allow parents in the setting to explore triggers for maybe physical outbursts of behaviour. The provider may need to come through our early intervention funding panel, and this might be for specific staff training. So if we can see a child is really struggling with their communication, for example, it might be that the setting would benefit from doing some Makaton training to be able to support this child's understanding within the setting. The setting could also use the money for some specific resources or some time for an additional adult to provide targeted work through small group intervention. We would be expecting the key person with support from the SENCO to put in targets and review these regularly, approximately every 6 weeks. And if the targets are not being achieved, we would ask the setting to be simplifying them and reviewing the tracking tools in place. If we then see little to no progress with the use of these strategies, we would be looking to make referrals to outside agencies. Depending on where the child's delay is, will depend on who a referral is made to. If clarity of speech is the main difficulty, it might be that a hearing test is recommended for the child before we look into a referral for speech and language therapy. Or it could be that we need to make a speech and language referral, a referral into the occupational therapy service or the specialist early education service within Surrey County Council. Throughout the tracking and implementation of strategies and reviews, the key worker or the SENCO will be talking to you as the parent or carer. You should have the opportunity to feed into this process, and it is good for you to be implementing the strategies at home as well. This all works much more effectively when we all work together. That's the end.